I'm Maria Titizian.
And I'm Rubina Margosian, and this is the Week in Review.
Every week we bring you the stories shaping Armenia and the region.
From politics and policy to social issues and conflict, we break down the news and what it means for you.
This week in the news, Armenians head to the polls this Sunday in a crucial vote. The EU responds to Russian trade pressure with €50 million in aid and a new support package for Armenian exports, and former high-ranking officials arrested on numerous charges. These stories and more in our weekly roundup of the news.
Amid growing tensions between Moscow and Yerevan ahead of Armenia's June 7 parliamentary elections, the leaders of Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan issued a joint statement urging Armenia to hold a national referendum as soon as possible on whether it wants to pursue European Union membership or remain in the Eurasian Economic Union. The statement, signed at the EA-EU summit in Astana, argued that Armenia's recent steps towards EU integration, including the passage of legislation launching the accession process and last month's Armenia-EU summit, posed risks to the bloc's economic security. The four countries also announced they would study the possible consequences of suspending Armenia's participation in the EA-EU. Representing Yerevan at the summit, Deputy Prime Minister Meher Grigoryan reiterated that Armenia has no intention of leaving the Eurasian Economic Union.
Following the joint statement, Russia recalled its ambassador to Armenia, Sergei Kopyrkin, for consultations over Armenia's relations with the European Union. At the same time, Russia continued to impose a ban on imports of Armenian fish and fish products, with additional restrictions placed on the import and transit of Armenian stone fruits, including cherries, apricots, plums, peaches, and fresh grapes. Armenian Minister of Territorial Administration and Infrastructure, David Khudatyan, pushed back. He acknowledged that risks exist, but characterized them as manageable for the Armenian economy and confirmed the government has a contingency plan, though he declined to disclose the details.
Well, in the meantime, Russian President Vladimir Putin called Prime Minister Pashinyan on June 1 to congratulate him on his birthday. According to the Armenian government, the two leaders discussed bilateral relations and the outcomes of the recent Eurasian Economic Union summit in Astana, with Pashinyan thanking Putin for what Yerevan described as his balanced approach to issues dividing the two countries. However, a source within the Russian government told Kommersant that the conversation should not be interpreted as an improvement in relations or a softening of Moscow's position on Armenia's European aspirations. According to the source, Russia continues to insist that Armenia put the question of EU integration and continued EA-EU membership to a nationwide referendum.
Russian Deputy Prime Minister Alexei Overchuk warned that Armenia could face serious difficulties with natural gas supplies, while stating that Moscow does not wish to see such an outcome, yet they continually threaten us with that. Speaking in an interview with the state broadcaster, Overchuk said Armenia has no alternative to Russian gas, but noted that the key question is through which route and under which conditions the country would receive it. He pointed to existing pipeline infrastructure, a 30% export tariff, market rate pricing, and intermediary margins as factors that would significantly raise costs for Yerevan.
And on the political front, Boris Titov, the Russian president's special representative for relations with international organizations on sustainable development, said Russia would replace Armenian agricultural imports with goods from Azerbaijan. He stated that Azerbaijan has a greater agricultural capacity than Armenia.
In response to Russian trade restrictions, the European Union this week pledged €50 million in financial aid, as well as a trade support package for Armenia. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen spoke by phone with Prime Minister Pashinyan, describing Russia's actions as economic coercion and confirming that immediate financial assistance is being prepared alongside trade facilitation measures for Armenian agricultural and food products. As part of the package, the EU is coordinating efforts to redirect, for example, Armenian flour exports to European markets. A shipment of 10,000 flowers was reported to be arriving in Riga, and this is in Latvia. EU-Armenia task force has been established, with Enlargement Commissioner Marta Kos set to lead its work. Kos also held a separate call with Armenia's Foreign Minister Mirzoyan, reiterating EU solidarity and indicating that work to strengthen trade and energy links in the South Caucasus would would be accelerated. EU ambassador to Armenia, Vasilis Maragos, met with Armenian exporters to gather information input on how the bloc could assist in market diversification, stressing that the measures represent an expansion of existing support frameworks rather than a new initiative. So this is important, right? Because the problem we've had is that most of our exports have gone to Russia. Now that Russia is, placing all of these bans on Armenian products, the problem is getting it to EU markets, one. Secondly, it's about standards, standards of phytosanitary standards, whatever it is. So now we're caught in this weird in-between space where the EU is saying, okay, I'm going to help you, I'm going to bring your products, but what happens if the standards aren't on par, right?
We'll find out soon enough. It's
Indeed.
definitely very helpful to have the products, be utilized in the international market, and maybe this will accelerate or,
Sure, I know what you're saying.
help the
Armenian
farmer,
producer,
the producer, take care of the standards, improve so that it's a legitimate exporter.
Yeah, and like everything else, Rubina, it's about diversification, right? And when we've relied on one partner for everything, this is what happens when that partner decides to punish you, right?
Well, and also maybe some things will change. Maybe let's see what the EU needs that Armenia can produce.
Right.
They will not be buying all the strawberries all the time if they don't need
I
it.
know,
or
and there's
flowers.
only so many strawberries that we can eat.
Anyhow, in other news, this week Armenia and the United States formally signed the Framework Agreement on Strategic Cooperation concerning the Trump Route for International Peace and Prosperity, TRIP. The agreement, which was initialed during Secretary of State Marco Rubio's short stop in Yerevan on May 27, was signed remotely, with both sides saying they will now move quickly to complete the domestic procedures necessary for its implementation. Speaking before Congress earlier this week, Marco Rubio described TRIP as a project that would transform Armenia into a regional trade hub and said it has reinvigorated what had previously been stagnant U.S.-Armenia relations. He acknowledged that Russia was less than happy about Washington's growing engagement in Armenia and suggested Moscow would prefer to see a different outcome in the country's parliamentary elections. Meanwhile, the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation approved a new round of strategic investments, including funding for the TRIP Development Company, the joint U.S.-Armenia venture that will oversee the project.
Yeah, a lot happening in relations. This week, representative of Armenian and Turkish business communities held talks in Turkey. The Armenian delegation crossed the Armenia-Turkey land border and traveled to Kars for the meeting. Sectors represented included food and beverages, bottled water, fruit, tobacco, construction, and tourism. Both sides welcomed the establishment of direct bilateral trade between their countries, which will allow shipments transiting third countries to designate Armenia or Turkey as origin or destination. Participants also highlighted the significance of granting Armenian goods access to the Akhalkalaki-Kars railway as a new opportunity for bilateral and regional trade. Separately, the new Baku-Tbilisi-Kars railway line was formally inaugurated, and the opening ceremony was attended by Armenia's Minister of Territorial Administration and Infrastructure, David Khudadyan, along with senior Georgian, Turkish, and Azerbaijani officials.
And in local news, authorities in Yerevan are facing growing backlash over the detention of Artsakh-Armenian activist Artur Osipyan. Osipyan was detained 2 weeks ago following a heated exchange with Prime Minister Pashinyan during a campaign event. He was detained over a Facebook post in which he had said he would crush the Prime Minister when he found him. He is currently on a hunger strike in detention. A number of civil society organizations have appealed to the Council of Europe Commissioner for Human Rights, calling for Osipyan's immediate release and arguing that his pretrial detention appears intended to punish his political speech rather than serve as a legitimate legal purpose. The group also expressed concern about his deteriorating health and warned that the case raises broader questions about freedom of expression and political pluralism in Armenia. Meanwhile, human rights defender Anahit Manasyan told reporters that her office has been monitoring the situation and that officials met with hunger strike inmates, including Osipyan, to assess their condition and address concerns. A little bit of a detail here, Osipyan had refused to meet with the representatives of the Ombudsman's office. However, they met with all hunger hunger strikers, and he was part of the group. So this is like this little detail. OCPN launched a hunger strike after his detention, protesting comments made by Prime Minister Pashinyan during their confrontation, in which Pashinyan referred to him as a deserter and questioned why he was still alive when Armenian soldiers had died in the 2020 Artsakh war.
Yeah, that was a very harsh statement. Armenian authorities have identified one of the masked men who appeared in a video issued in mid-May threatening Prime Minister Pashinyan and have issued an arrest warrant for him. The investigative committee said it had obtained evidence indicating that Meher Mirzoyan, who has been residing in a foreign country since 2024, was part of a group of at least 4 individuals who were allegedly preparing to kill the prime minister in connection with his political and state activities. The case stems from a video circulated online on May 18, in which a group of masked and armed individuals issued threats and insults directed at Pashinyan.
And Armenia's prosecutors have brought charges against 4 former army commanders in connection with the deadly March 1, 2008 post-election crackdown in Yerevan, which left 10 people dead. Prosecutors named former President Robert Kocharian, former Defense Minister Mikhail Harutyunyan, former Defense Minister Serian Ohanyan, and former CSTO Secretary General Yuri Khachaturov among the officials linked to the case. Kocharian and several former officials were acquitted in 2021 after Armenia's constitutional court struck down the charge of overthrowing the constitutional order. Authorities were able to reopen the case following a landmark ruling by the European Court of Human Rights. This was in September of 2025. The European Court of Human Rights found that Armenia had violated Article 2 of the European Convention on Human Rights, the right to life, in relation to 7 of the 9 victims. The court concluded that security forces had used excessive and indiscriminate force against protesters and found serious shortcomings in the authorities' investigation of the deaths. The ruling specifically criticized the former authorities in Yerevan, stating that they had done very little to properly identify and prosecute those responsible. The ruling enabled prosecutors in Yerevan to resume the criminal investigation.
Months after tensions between Prime Minister Pashinyan and the Armenian Apostolic Church escalated, Catholicos Karegin II held a rare press conference to respond to accusations against the church and its leadership. Rejecting claims that the church has become politically involved, Karegin said it has a responsibility to speak out on issues affecting the nation while remaining independent of political parties. He also defended references to Artsakh during church services, arguing that advocating for justice and the rights of Artsakh Armenians should not be equated with promoting war. The Catholicos revealed that more than a dozen criminal proceedings have been initiated against the church, which he described as an attempt to bring it under state control. He also defended Archbishop Bakrat Galistanyan, calling the charges against him unfounded and describing him as a devoted patriot and clergyman. Meanwhile, Galistanyan was released from pretrial detention this week and placed under house arrest. The former head of the Davush diocese is facing charges of terrorism and attempting to seize power.
In other news, Armenia's authorities detained former Education Minister Armen Ashotyan and several other formal officials on June 5 as part of a corruption investigation involving property formerly owned by Yerevan's Brusov State University. Those detained include Ashotyan and former university rector Gayane Gasparian. At the time of recording, a court was considering a motion to place Ashotyan in pretrial detention. The investigative committee said it had initiated criminal proceedings against former finance minister and former state revenue committee chairman Gagi Khachaturian, his son, and 3 other individuals as well. Authorities alleged that between 2009 and 2016, Ashotyan facilitated the transfer of a 451 square meter property and land parcel in central Yerevan out of state ownership. They further alleged that the property's origin was concealed through a series of transactions before it was ultimately registered in the name of Khachaturian's son. Ashotyan spent more than 2 years in detention after being arrested on embezzlement charges in 2023. He was released in August of 25 under court-imposed restrictions. Khachaturian was arrested on embezzlement charges in 2019 2019 and later released on bail due to health concerns.
And former Transport and Communications Minister and former Yerevan Mayor Gagik Beklaryan was also detained on June 5 as part of a corruption investigation. Armenia's Anti-Corruption Committee said he faces charges of abuse of office and large-scale money laundering. Investigators have asked a court to place him in pretrial detention. Authorities have not released additional details about the case.
And in a separate development, Armenia's investigative committee announced that Gyumri Mayor Vartan Ghukasyan has been accused of preparing to seize power. According to investigators, Ghukasyan and several other individuals spent 2025 meeting with people across Armenia and recruiting supporters as part of an alleged plan to take power. The investigative committee said the group was unable to move forward with the alleged plot because of circumstances beyond their control. Ghukasyan is currently being held in pretrial detention on a separate corruption-related charge. Authorities have opened a criminal case on charges of preparing to seize power.
It's like a lot of action happening, just 2 days before the elections.
Too many arrests. Well, most of the arrested belong to a political party that is not running directly in the elections.
Yes, well, as always, moving on to our elections digest, the final one, hopefully. We'll see what happens after the elections, but official election digest is the last week.
If there's no round two, yes.
If there's no round two. Well, speaking of round two or round one, we published our poll, our fourth and final poll this week, and we actually did a public presentation yesterday, June 4th, here in Yerevan, attended with many, many people. And it does show that the incumbent ruling Civil Contract Party has 36.5% of the vote, but this does not include the undecided. So it does look like they have a pretty good chance of getting a majority. But again, things are very, very unpredictable.
I thought you were going to say it does look like this is our final election digest.
Okay, it is.
Because our polls don't show any possibilities of a second round.
But it remains to be seen what will happen. But since our website has been hacked today and is not available at the moment, but hopefully in a few hours it will be fixed. But this is part of the game. The CEC site wasn't working. Several other sites are down.
And this is not the first time
we're
attacked. Our website was offline for several hours a couple of weeks ago as well.
Right. And it's before elections, tensions are high, and things like this will happen. But nonetheless, the poll is available on our website in both languages, in Armenian and English. So you can check that out. And I guess we can do our little plug about what we're doing on Sunday now before we talk about, the lovely things that happened with the campaign.
More arrests.
But all day Sunday, we're going to be doing live updates. You can find all of those live updates on our website, also through our social media platforms. We'll be doing some short videos, working throughout the day. Polls open at 8 a.m., close at 8 p.m. Hopefully, we might go live at some point, but we'll see how things progress. But we will be keeping you informed about the process of the vote. And on that note, Rub, take it away.
Well, speaking of arrests, as I mentioned, Alexan Alexanian, a senior member of businessman Samvel Garabedyan's Strong Armenia team, has been placed in pretrial detention for 2 months on charges of paying people to participate in rallies and laundering money. According to the investigative committee, Alexanian, as founder and head of the Our Way NGO, fictitiously employed about 1,400 people between September of 25 and May of 26 and used them to participate in, to send them off to rallies, let me put it that way, and demonstrations organized by Garabedyan supporters, the NGO, and the Strong Armenia Party. Investigators said more than 400 of those individuals were simultaneously employed by other companies. The committee said about 500 people have been questioned as part of the investigation.
And in an interesting plot twist, I guess you could say, Aram Sarkisyan, leader of the Republic Party, said he will formally appeal to the Central Electoral Commission today to bar the Strong Armenia Alliance from participating in the June 7 parliamentary election. Now, the proposal to appeal to the Central Electoral Commission to block Strong Armenia's participation was made by Pashinyan, actually, during a televised debate among party leaders on public television on June 4, which was a bit of a disaster. I mean,
debates traditionally in our context don't bode well.
Well, under Armenian law, political parties and electoral alliances can be removed from the ballot if they commit serious campaign violations that could influence the outcome of the election. In this case, the issue appears to concern a possible request to disqualify the Strong Armenia over an alleged violation of campaign rules. If the CEC decides there are sufficient grounds, it can ask the courts to invalidate the party's registration, effectively barring it from participating in the election. The case would then be reviewed by Armenia's administrative court, which has the authority to either uphold the alliance's registration or remove it from the ballot. Because voting is scheduled, in 2 days, in June 7, any such challenge would have to be resolved very quickly. Under Armenian law, the administrative court must issue a ruling no later than the day before the election. The case would be heard by a panel of 5 judges. So, as of recording time, we don't know what the outcome of that will be. So
we're also not certain if the application has been made.
Yeah, all we know are these announcements. That's why we wanted to let you know. But, everything with a grain of salt. And if there's any big issues, we'll put it on our description on the website.
Also, a full disclosure, we're not sure on what grounds. Well, there are too many grounds
Yes.
right now. Which ones particularly? Because Strong Armenia has been accused and its members have been arrested for corruption charges, coercion of people to participate in rallies, all those recordings, over 50 recordings, not all of them
50
Strong
cases.
Armenia cases.
Yeah.
Not all of them regarding Strong Armenia, but the majority. We've also, just recently, seen hundreds of flights from hundreds of people arriving from
Thousands of people arriving from Russia.
To vote. A lot of them say, when asked, that they're here to vote for Strong Armenia and then return the next day or several days later. So we'll see what all of these is going to amount to. And there's still announcements are coming in about individuals linked to both Strong Armenia and Prosperous Armenia Party being investigated for election-related bribery charges.
Okay, and as always, quickly go over some of the articles that we published this week. Obviously, as I mentioned, the election survey, we called it Opposition Remains Fragmented While Incumbent Strengthens. Armenia heads into election day. So it was our fourth and final survey. Shows continued gains for civil contract, improving public perceptions of the economy and the country's direction, and rising approval ratings for Pashinyan. Meanwhile, opposition forces remain fragmented as Armenian voters head to the polls. And according to our polls, Strong Armenia will definitely pass the threshold to get into parliament. But Armenia Alliance, which is now the main opposition bloc in parliament, is not even meeting the 8% threshold. They're at about 4.8%. And Prosperous Armenia, which requires 4%, is about 3.1 or 2%. So it's going to be very interesting to see who that third party is that's going to get into parliament. Because of the stable majority clause, even if they don't pass the threshold, a third party will be bumped up. Yeah, we said it at the same time.
Yes. Because it's a funny word to say.
Yeah, bumped up. There you go.
Well, we did publish a lot of articles this week about the elections, naturally, which makes sense. One was by Sheila Pailan, Vote for Blank. That's the title. And basically what she's saying that the only truly wasted vote is the one never cast.
Exactly,
So she's saying, she's encouraging people to go participate and maybe vote for smaller parties that have no chance of winning, because we all know that the Armenian voter and a lot of voters do some math before going, saying what to do not to waste my vote. If I vote for the smaller parties, they're not going to pass. And she's saying, if that's what your conscience wants and that's a person you want to vote for, do it, because you never know.
That's right. And speaking of voting, we have another piece by Lewin Rogers. He's an Irish-American journalist who is interning with us this summer, and it's called Armenia's Youth Political Vacuum. He spoke to a number of youth activists, just ordinary voters, and says that something that we know, that there's a lot of apathy among the youth and a lot of indecision. So nearly a decade after, the Velvet Revolution, young voters feel increasingly disillusioned ahead of the elections. And he, as I said, spoke to a bunch of people. It's a very interesting piece, sobering piece, actually.
And actually a little bit similar to Sheila's piece, but very different from it, is a piece by a political scientist, Yevgenia Baturian. It's called Voting for Parliament, Cutting Through the Clutter. It's again like her musings about how the pre-election psychosis takes over a lot of voters and people are confused, and basically a little bit of what to do. And it's okay to vote against one. You don't definitely need to vote for, even though voting for is better than voting against.
Right, but it's about exercising that Right. And David Khachaturian, it's called The Women They Refuse to See. It's a little bit about elections, a little bit not. He says, who does the work that keeps Armenia's institutions functioning? And ahead of the elections, he examines the disconnect between the women who sustain public life, and I would say private life as well, and the political class that claims to represent it. Again, it's just his own personal musings on how women are really the engine.
It's like the ones who come prepared, who follow up,
Yeah.
and the ones who are everything and keep everything going. However, when it comes to the political representation,
Yeah.
there's one female candidate for
For Prime Minister out of 1918. Yeah.
Well, and we did publish Statecraft and Governance by Nerses Kopalian also this week. This one was titled How America Became a Pillar of Armenia's Security. He says from access to American weapon systems to implementation of TRIP to cooperation on critical minerals, the agreements signed during the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio's visit represent a new stage in U.S.-Armenia relations. He examines their security significance and writes that it was a recognition by Washington that Armenia's security and stability have become increasingly important components of its regional policy.
And amidst all of the kerfuffle, if you will, June 1 is International Day of the Child. We published a photo story by Varina Ghazarian. It's called The Skills Left on the Playground. And, it's so true. All of these wonderful games we used to play as children outside. And in Armenia, there were specific ones that, weren't familiar to me. One-legged black devil, 7 stones, of course, I knew, hide and seek or havala. And he talks about a bunch of games and says that there was a time when summer afternoons, stretched endlessly when voices echoed between buildings and children invented entire worlds with little more than a ball, a handkerchief, or a piece of chalk. So he looks back at the courtyard games that shaped generations of Armenian children and really talks about what happens when those spaces fall silent. Kind of sad and nostalgic.
And it's also a beautiful photo story.
Yes, indeed. And that's the kind of week it's been here in Armenia. Thank you for listening. Shall I say have a safe and peaceful weekend?
Yes, definitely more so this week than ever.
More than ever. June 7, we head to the polls for parliamentary elections. If you're a citizen, you live in Armenia, exercise that right. We will be reporting all day and late into the night.
And before you go to the polls, if you're in Armenia and can vote, we do have an election section on our website, which hopefully will be working.
Yes.
And we do have primers that explains who's who, what the main candidates' policies are, foreign policy, domestic issues, how things work, the system, how it works, and also some of, Sheila's and Jenny's advice on what to do when you don't know what to do might be useful.
Exactly.
So, consult the website if you're,
if you're confused.
Well, if you're looking for information.
There you go. See you next week.